Right, good evening everybody. Welcome to yet another instalment from BIBBA with another webinar coming up. While we're here first though, Roger, I must announce we've had a couple of complaints.
Brilliant, well done.
The first complaint, unfortunately, is something to do with the F word. It says here that you've been accused that you said that beekeeping is fun. I don't know if that's true or not.
I probably did, yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah. So try to refrain from using the F words with beekeeping.
Okay, then, yeah, we'll do, yeah.
And the other one was you were guilty, allegedly anyway, of wearing bright yellow braces, and bright coloured braces aren't really on. Oh, hang on. You've done it again, haven't you? Okay, right. Okay. Roger's a bit of a household name, certainly in my house. I won't tell you what we say before the word Roger, but hope you enjoy the session tonight. There'll be some questions and answers at the end. If you want to know what's going on, there's a rash of BIBBA webinars coming up in the future. There is a website called beekeeping.events where you can find out not only what's going on from BIBBA, but BBKA, as well as the Irish, Scottish, national events, free events, paid for events. It's worth looking at because it's useful for beekeeping. Anyway, without further ado, over to you, Roger. Enjoy the show.
Well, good evening, Carl. Good evening, fellow beekeepers. Let's hope this works this time. It didn't a few minutes ago. Right, here we go then. Bees and Queens for everyone. You know the introduction about the book. I will keep mentioning Dave Cushion's website because I still do keep coming across beekeepers who've never heard of it, and it's not always the beginners either. Have a look on it. There's a massive stuff on there, and it's all fairly sound information, and I will be referencing it during the talk. I've now done 3 webinars on the trot, and they're in a logical sequence. In the first one, just to remind you, I asked where we are, talked a little bit about the importation reasons for it, history and the problems, how we got where we are at the moment with evolution, the forming of the subspecies, and some of my experiences. And then I asked how we can move on and can we actually do it. And the second webinar, I did question the overall knowledge and skill levels that I come across. I did actually give the reasons for it and the results, and some ideas of probably how we can improve them. I've always questioned what beekeepers are taught, because very often it's not what bees want. It's stuff straight out of the book, fluffy stuff straight out of the book. I gave an indication of the differences between the prolific and non-prolific bees, and how perhaps the non-prolific may well be more suitable to our conditions than the prolific. I discussed queens, they're always supposed to be big ones, and replace them regularly. And I questioned both those as well. And I suggested some roles for beekeeping associations, how probably can aid their teaching and demonstrating, and also it's best if they've got a teaching apiary, or rather it's useful if they've got a teaching apiary. But in this webinar, just a brief reminder what BIBBA is about. What we're actually doing overall, which is sort of assessing the colonies we got, and then from that, we're selecting the good ones and probably culling the worst ones, and propagating. I'm going to give you a few brief methods that's suitable for both small and large scale beekeepers, a little bit about queen mating and overwintering nukes, and of course at the same time you're overwintering queens. I have to state this is not a tutorial on producing bees and queens. There's just not enough time, and that will be separate webinars, and we are looking at doing videos next summer as well. What I am going to do though is perhaps give you a few ideas of what can be achieved with a few examples, but that's only a few. There's plenty more. There's lots of things available for us. But I want to try and get the message across that what I'm suggesting is probably little more than an extension of what the vast majority of beekeepers are already doing. So you can have great benefits with a little bit more time and effort. And at the end of the day, it will be low cost, low in terms of time and money. So a reminder of the purpose of BIBBA, it's simply trying to reduce the importation of bees and queens. The reasons are well known, the main ones being possibly less suited to our conditions, possibly introducing pests and diseases, pathogens that we haven't got at the moment, and possibly aggression in later generations. And I'll highlight the words possibly because I think it's unfair to tar everything with the same brush. But they are the main reasons I think that most people object to imports. Now, if you've got bees, what a lot of people don't seem to realise is that you need never buy bees or queens again. And I do come across a lot of people with several colonies, and they lose one, so they go and buy another one. I've been the auctioneer at the West Sussex auction for probably, well, certainly over 30 years. There's a photograph of me in a book dated 1986 selling things. We sell bees off each year. And I'm selling bees to people that I know have got 6, 8, 10 colonies. I have a chat to them afterwards, and they simply do not know how to increase their colonies. It's amazing. I think beekeeping in general needs to keep better bees. We can look after what we have much better, I think, because then we might reduce colony losses. So, of course, there's less need for imported queens. I think we've got quite a bit of work to do to increase the knowledge and skills levels, but that's really down to local beekeeping associations. Yes, there's help available if they need it. I think we could do well to improve some of the management methods as well. As I tried to touch on last week, there's quite a lot of the methods that the old beekeepers used have gone because we've lost a whole sort of generation of beekeepers almost, and we've got to try and rediscover some of those skills and methods, and work with other beekeepers. The bees work with each other out in the air, but I think beekeepers could work a lot closer with each other to help each other out. So good bees and queens, you may have good bees around you. How do you know unless you assess them? Assess them, and of course other people's bees as well. Are they pleasant to handle? Are they locally adapted? Are they productive? Are they survivors? That is the key, survivors, because if they survive, then they're going to do all the other things that you want. If they're dead, they're not much use to you. There's a well-known saying: "The best bees for your district may already be there," and I think that's very true. So don't just discard them because you think that somebody else has got something better. Have a look a lot closer. I very often see people going to kill a queen because perhaps it's non-prolific. It's not producing the masses of brood that beekeepers are told that they need, and they're just going to knock it on the head. And I've seen some absolutely brilliant colonies that were the queens were for the job. At the end of the day, we're propagating both bees and queens. That's all we're asking is propagation. But if you think about it, the two have got to go together, because you need bees in order to produce queens, and you need queens to head the colonies, and that's not necessarily the same thing. In doing so, it does give us a great opportunity to improve our bees, because of course we can introduce a selection process. And personally, I think it adds to the enjoyment. One of the highlights of beekeeping, as far as I'm concerned, is producing a queen yourself from your own stock is better than the one that she replaced. It really does, even after 57, 58 years of beekeeping, it really does give me a huge amount of enjoyment. What you need to be aware of, though, is the usual negative twaddle that you very often get from places like swarm cells will perpetuate swarming. Well, only if they're swarmy bees in the first place. If you're not using swarm cells on swarmy bees, you haven't got a problem. Whoops. Emergency cells produce inferior queens. Yes, they can do, but so can every other type of cell. And if you're very careful, you can have some cracking good queens from emergency cells. You can't improve mongrel stock. Well, I think I discussed this last week, and I'm living proof that you can, because I've done it. Most of us have got mongrels, unless we're in an area where we got pure native bees, Apis mellifera mellifera. The rest of us have probably got mongrelized stock of one description or another. Certainly some degree of integration. You need a lot of colonies to improve your stock. Well, it doesn't half help, but if you've got a dozen beekeepers with 4 or 5 colonies each, individually, perhaps they can't do very much, but get together. All of a sudden, you've got 50 colonies or so, 50, 60 colonies. You can then do something between you. So perhaps form a little group or part of a beekeeping association. There's loads and loads and loads of ways around it. You can't produce bees, queens, and honey in the same colony. I don't know how many times I've heard this, but I think, as I said last week, of course you can. And I'm going to give an example a little bit later of what we did at Whisper Green. But if you think about it, the bees have been doing it for millions of years. Of course you can do it. You can't produce queens early. Well, it's not particularly easy. Yes, they might be a few weeks later. But if you get rid of the need for early queens, then you haven't got a problem, have you? The weather is bad for mating. This one keeps coming up, but I have done quite a bit of work with the Orkney beekeepers, and I can tell you, folk, that up there, sometimes during the summer, for a period of 2 or 3 weeks, everything is horizontal. The wind, the rain, the hail, and they don't have anywhere near as many problems as the rest of us. You can't produce enough bees for beginners. I'll talk about that later. It's difficult. You know, people want things easy, and raising from your own stock narrows a gene pool. Well, I think, as I explained, it doesn't really. But all of this sort of stuff is peddled by what I consider lazy or poor beekeepers. They can't be bothered, or they can't be bothered to learn. Be positive, folks. I hope every one of you are, and think, yes, you can do it. Of course you can do it. Let's look for reasons to do things rather than not doing them. Beekeeping associations are in a brilliant position, especially if they've got a teaching apiary, because they can use it for teaching both theory and practical. If you haven't got a teaching apiary, it's very difficult to teach practical. And that, as I've said, I think a few times in the other webinars, that, in my opinion, is the most important part of it, because everybody has got to do practical beekeeping. In a teaching apiary, of course, you can have good bees, which will be good to demonstrate on, and also could be a brilliant genetic resource, because everything's there together, and people can dip in and not quite help themselves, but they can spread those genetics in the locality. They can perhaps raise queen cells that they can either use in their own teaching apiary or for distribution to members. And raising queen cells is really easy. You can get members perhaps to bring their mating nukes into one place. So you can put the queen cells straight in. You can show people how to put them in the hive. And then when the queen's emerged, you can then show them various things that could happen to the colony afterwards. It doesn't necessarily have to be right in the teaching apiary. It could be a bit to the side, or a joining field, or something like that. You probably need some sort of barrier, because of course you're bringing colonies in that could potentially be diseased. You can provide bees and queens for beginners, and I'll be describing some ways of doing that a little bit later. You can have a separate or special interest group, and of course something like a queen rearing group could be part of the main association. Now, it could be that you've got a separate apiary, or perhaps you can use a members apiary. Now, for doing this sort of work, queen rearing, you only need about 12 or 14 weeks during the summer, so it could be a temporary site. But please, 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 folks, it's all very well suggesting these things to a committee, but what you're doing, if you're not careful, is putting more pressure on them. Please don't overburden your committee. If you're going to suggest something, either volunteer to help yourself, or try and get some help in other ways. So if you want to improve your bees, you don't actually need to know much about genetics. I certainly don't. Most I know about it is how to spell it, so I can put it up on PowerPoint without the spell checker not knocking it out. Colony assessment in my book is ongoing. I'm assessing a colony all the time. Even if I go to somebody else's apiary, I'm thinking to myself, quite like these bees, or I'm jolly glad they're not mine. You don't have to do anything too great to it. Okay, I've been keeping bees 50 some odd years, so I can tell almost instantly. In fact, there was a little case back in July where I actually assessed a colony from outside. So, you know, it can be done. culling is incredibly important, I think, because there's no point keeping poor stock at all. And even if all you do is just knock out the poorer ones all the time, you're going to be improving. Whatever you do in beekeeping, try and keep it simple, because you generally got a get out of jail card. If you do something very complicated, it's very often quite difficult to get out of something if you've got a problem. So I mentioned assessing. Assess your own bees. Do it at every inspection. If you're assessing something, you're measuring it. If you're measuring it, you really need to record it, because then you can make comparisons with other colonies in your own apiary, or bees that belong to other people. If you go somewhere like perhaps attend apiary meetings, or you work with other beekeepers, assess their handling techniques as well, because if a colony behaves differently under one person or another, it could well be that one beekeeper might use perhaps a bit more or a bit less smoke than somebody else, or perhaps they use crash bang methods where somebody else is nice and calm. Aggression is very often, or in my experience, very often caused by bad handling. When you do select which colonies to rear queens from, which ones to cull, keep it simple if you can. I think temperament, temper, docility, call it what you like. It probably means slightly different things, but it's the same as far as I'm concerned. That really ought to be the top of everybody's list, I think. And I remember going to a talk once, which I believe was at BBK Spring Convention, but I can't remember. And a very well-known beekeeper was talking about queen rearing, and gave a list of criteria. Temper of a colony was number 8 on the list, and I thought to myself, what sort of message does that give to beekeepers, especially beginners? But I'm sorry, folks. Well, we live on a fairly small island, and I think as beekeepers, we've got to be responsible and keep good tempered bees. I think calmness on the comb is quite a good, quite a good characteristic, because if they're calm on the comb, I don't mean the soppy things that just sit there and don't do anything. They've got no sort of character or vibrancy at all. I mean bees that are actually moving around and they're doing something. You can see they're doing something. But very often you get, well, I don't say very often, I did say very often, but I don't really mean that. Occasionally you get what are called runners, and they zoom around all over the place. If the bees run, the queens always do. And if you want to try and find the queen, it just makes it more difficult. So it makes it easier to handle a calm colony than a colony of runners. And of course, it takes less time as well. And that the bees actually suit the locality. What I mean is they're going to be survivors, and they're survivors not because they're being mollycoddled. If they're being mollycoddled, it could mask all sorts of things, and it doesn't show up any lack of hardiness. That, in my book, is enough for most people, and quite honestly, is all I use. Because if you get all of those 3 right, everything else seems to drop into place. So set your own criteria wherever you are. I suggest you don't have a long list, and some speakers and writers have a list as long as your arm. You don't need that, because what will happen is, I think you'll get one thing right, concentrate on something else, and then you lose the first one. You'll be forever disappointed. You'll be running around in circles. You throw your hands up in the air, and you'll get fed up. Progress gradually. So perhaps pick on temperament first, And then you may find that in doing so, you can weedle out the calmness on the comb and the suitability to the locality. But you have what you want in your area, not what I'm going to tell you ought to have. Beware though that in different areas you may need different kinds of bees, and it could be for a simple thing like the seasons. If perhaps you're in an oilseed rape area, you may need bees that get going early in the season, build up early in the season. But if you're in perhaps a heather district and that's about all you've got, then you need bees that build up late. Those simple things like that, and they needn't necessarily be a long way away, because I've known beekeepers only 10, 20, 30 miles away, and they've got different conditions, so they do need different sorts of bees. So if anybody's been to any of my talks should know that of how I select, breed and cull my bees. Like everything else in beekeeping, I try to keep it simple, and I'm not a scientific beekeeper, so the scientists might think I'm barking up the wrong tree. But it works for me, and it's worked for a long time, and it continues to work. You folk can do the same, and all I do is however many colonies I've got, it could be 2, it could be 100, doesn't really matter. Just split them into 2 roughly equal groups. It's only a mental thing. I just put a note on the record sheet, that's all. So I can have one of these that I'm going to tell you about right next to the other. So I'll put them in 2 groups. Group A is the good group. So they're the ones with the better characteristics, that I'm happy to raise queens from any in that group, and I don't replace any of those queens unless absolutely necessary. Now, Group B, that's the poorer ones, the less desirable. These are the ones that I'm constantly requeening during the season, and when I've got queen cells from Group A, I then requeen any, or put a queen cell in any in Group B. It really doesn't matter. So any from Group A, not the same one each time. I very rarely take queen cells or genetic material from the same colony twice in 1 year. So that works pretty well. And then, of course, if you get those in Group B that are better than Group A, you just change them in the group. And most of us might have mongrels, as I stated, and despite what you might be told, they very definitely can be improved. It might take you a few generations, but they can be improved. I think it helps if you can work together. If you've got 50 or 100 colonies, you can work on your own quite happily. But the vast majority of beekeepers, probably 75 or 80%, have got 5 colonies or less. It's then quite difficult to do anything serious on your own. So, as I've already said, just get together in a group, or perhaps your local beekeeping association. And it's a pretty poor beekeeping association that doesn't let the members do something like that. What I will ask you is that please don't parachute imported queens in, thinking that you've got something there to start with and then breed from them, because you could well end up being very disappointed, and you could well get rid of some really good stock to replace them with. But whatever it is, try to use what suits your area, what's got a history of surviving in your area, and raise your own queens. And it is really simple. So producing bees and queens, then I think there are probably 2 approaches, 2 main approaches anyway. And it depends, of course, on circumstances and needs. You get the ordinary beekeepers that I was talking about. I consider myself to be quite ordinary, and there's a lot of people who'd agree with me on that. Really only need small numbers of queens. So if you've got 5 or perhaps 10 colonies, you only need a handful of queens a year. You'll probably do it on an ad hoc basis when circumstances are allowed, and you'll do it with minimal equipment. You don't have to buy anything at all. Well, you shouldn't anyway. Or if you do, buy something that's useful for something else. Then, of course, you get the commercial beekeepers and perhaps beekeeping associations. They will need to deal in larger numbers, so they will need different techniques and perhaps more equipment or specialist equipment. But even then, it's surprising what you can do for £100. So we need queen cells to produce queens. That's the best way I know of doing it. Which got 2 options. You've got natural cells, which would probably suit the small scale beekeeper, and what I call artificial cells, where you've got to do some sort of manipulation of the larva or the cell the egg was originally laid in. These would suit the larger scale beekeeper and the local beekeeping association, who probably wants to raise queen cells for their members. So queen cells then, they're not understood enough. But ask the question, what do most people do when they see queen cells? And I like asking this in a live presentation, because this is what is usually comes out: panic. Most people panic. And the reason I panic is I'm afraid in a lot of instances they're taught to panic. Why do that? Queen cells, or a colony that's producing queen cells, can be brilliant opportunities. If the colony isn't very good, that's fine. It's in a condition where it will build queen cells. But on the other hand, if it is putting up queen cells and it's a good colony, you can use them. So you've got a brilliant opportunity there. So what do we got? We all know we've got 3 kinds of natural queen cells: swarm, emergency, and supersedure. Sadly, they're frowned upon by some people. Why, I don't know, but I find it rather amusing that some people would tell you not to use, say, swarm cells, and then tell you how to perform an artificial swarm. It doesn't make sense to me, but there it is. That's the sort of thing that happens in beekeeping. What is wrong with them? Because the bees have been using them for millions of years. All of a sudden, it's only in the last 150 years that a few humans have decided there's something wrong with them. But I reckon that probably 75% of the queens come from natural queen cells anyway. That's a rough guess. I think they're well suitable if care is taken, but of course that is beyond the scope of this webinar. Now, artificial cells, there are several methods of creating those. You may need a little equipment, but as I said, £100 does actually go a long way. It's more controlled, and that is one of the benefits to it, making it a lot easier to plan. So instead of the bees starting to produce queen cells 2 days before you go on holiday, you can do it 2 days after you come back, if you like. And the great thing about it is that more queens can be raised, and on a continual basis too. There's one of my cell bars. There's 9 there. If you think of it, if a beekeeping association raised that, there's an awful lot of teaching there. If you leave one for the colony that raised them, 8 beekeepers, 8 members can walk away with a queen cell. Okay, you might have to say to them 2 days or 4 days beforehand, look, if you want a queen cell, get your colony ready. But look at those really nice queen cells, and if they come from a good colony, they will do a lot of good in the locality. Now, these queens need to get mated somehow, and the mating of queens will depend on circumstances. I suspect the smaller beekeeper will probably usually use a full colony. They've got a honey producing colony that's that they want to replace the queen, so take the queen away, and with a little bit of preparation, just put in a queen cell. Standard frame nucleus, I like. You can combine it with producing bees as well, which again works in nice and neat for local beekeeping association. Or mini nukes, those little jobbies usually made out of polystyrene, certainly are if they're commercial ones. If not, I've seen all sorts of things made by ordinary beekeepers. I've even seen them made out of sandwich boxes. If it works, fine. This is a 5 comb nuke. Now the box itself is one of 14 I made out of recycled material. Cost me absolutely nothing. The stands are makeshift, cost me nothing. So cheap and easy way of producing queens. Really easy way of doing it. This is the queen rearing area of the old Whisper Green teaching April we moved about 12 months ago. But you can see all the nukes there, and the older, the larger honey producing colonies in the background. It doesn't actually need much room. Yes, it probably needs to be away from habitation, but you know, somebody's orchard or a corner of a field or behind a farm building or somewhere like that, it's surprising you what you can get in there. What you need to be careful of is where you place them. Try to keep them away from full colonies if you can, for obvious reasons. So producing bees then, some beekeepers can't actually control it, especially newer ones. And in fact, I've come across an awful lot of beekeepers who just don't know at swarm time how to keep all the bees in the same box. It's amazing. They just know probably artificial swarm, which of course always makes increase, and that is really just about it. There really are many methods, but they're based on swarms, swarm prevention and control, or managed increase one way or another. So let's just have a look at swarms first. Personally, I think they've got an undeserved reputation. They used to be a lot better than they are now. 20 plus years ago, we never had problems with them, with queens failing that we do now, or being superseded, or even queens not even coming into laying swarms. Personally, I think a lot of swarms, especially if they've come from an unmanaged colony, call it feral, call it wild if you like, very often are better than some of the managed colonies I see. Now, if you had one member in each beekeeping association who took in excess swarms, they could perhaps manage them and do it perhaps not quite as a sideline, but away from the main teaching apiary, perhaps helping beginners, taking beginners and teaching them how to collect swarms, hive them, development into full colonies, all sorts of things like that. That could be a really useful asset to a beekeeping association. But of course, you think of the teaching opportunities, you can check for disease, you can see them building up. Perhaps the queen can be kept. If she isn't that good, you can do demonstrations on queen introduction, all sorts of things like that. And above all, you've got bees there, which may well be surplus. So you've got bees for beginners or for propagating themselves to produce bees for beginners. Swarm control methods, most of them have surplus queen cells. Some of them, such as the artificial swarm and nucleus, provide increase, or nucleus method, provide increase too. If you've got one of the methods that uses a board, such as Snellgrove, Horsley, Demarest, or one of the variations, then you've got a top box usually, or in fact always, with that you can produce bees and a new queen in the top box. And you could probably produce 3 nukes out of one colony. Each one of those is going to raise a queen, hopefully. You know, so it could be very productive. And look at that situation there. You're producing bees, you're producing queens, you're producing honey. It is suitable for small apiaries, so it's not really the sort of thing that anybody with too many colonies will use. I don't use them. I thought about it on several occasions for demonstration purposes, but I haven't used them myself. But this is one very successful apiary that I came across. There are 14 colonies there, and the man every year got half a ton of honey. They were all native bees, and he Snellgroved every colony every year. You probably haven't spotted it, but the colonies are on a jumbo brew boxes, and if you look carefully there, there's an entrance, and you look carefully on all the other hives apart from the little one. They are all on Snellgrove boards. So each one is effectively a double brood chamber with another colony in the top box raising another queen. If that queen's better than the one in the bottom, he just swaps it over. If it isn't, he keeps the original one. And there's all sorts of things that particular man does, including a comb change. None of his combs were any more than 2 years old. Simple splitting is probably the most common way of making increase. Literally, it's just taking bees and combs from one colony. A variation, if you've got more colonies, of course, is to take a smaller number of combs from more colonies, from 3 or more colonies. So perhaps 1 or 2 combs at the most from each colony. You can take the food if you use a brood box as a super. You can take the comb of food from that, or the food for the colony for that. Now that, with something of that nature, can be done several times a year if you want to. I know I keep battering on about the 2-frame nuke, but I've used it for over 40 years, and it works very, very well. You won't see it in any books, but a lot of people have copied me, and they will vouch that, well, occasionally something goes wrong, like the queen not mating, but in general they will do very well. And the reason I'm going to suggest it is because it suits all sorts of beekeepers, and the cost is virtually zero. All you need is a frame of food. I've done this in another webinar, so I'll only do it basics. You need a frame of food, a frame of sealed brood with adhering bees. Give it a queen cell, fill it up with drawn comb, and that's basically it. It's nice and economical on bees, and it will build up very quickly. You could move it to another apiary if you wanted, or perhaps put it in the place of another nuke so you don't lose the flying bees. There's all sorts of things that you can do. But the great thing about that is if you do it early in the year, you can, well, this last year, I've had 5 queens mated in some of mine, but let's say 3, Certainly up country, you'll probably not get any more than 3 anyway. Now, in 2018, at Whisper Green Teaching Apiary, I did a demonstration of one particular method. I kept hearing from beekeeping associations that they can't produce enough nukes for their beginners. So I demonstrated this method that I've used for over 40 years, and it produces bees for any purpose you like. Could be increase, could be for sale, or it could be for a queen rearing or any other use that you've got. You've guessed I'll probably call it or you probably guessed I'll call it the Roger Patterson method. It's because I've used it since the 1970s in various forms. Very little new in beekeeping. Basically what it is a collection of methods. Now you can make rapid increase in the summer. Certainly the further south you are, the more increase you'll make. Obviously the further north, the less increase you'll make most years. I can get a 10-fold increase quite easily in West Sussex every year. Maybe less further north, as I said. Now, this method you won't find in standard books. So if you're going in for the exams or something like that, I wouldn't suggest it. And if you quote my name, you'll more than likely fail anyway. But it is very, very flexible. And again, it's another lecture on its own. I'm only going to give you the basic principles here, but here they are. Early in the season, you take a strong colony, which we'll call A. There's a plan view of it. It may be supered, probably better if it is. Where I am, I can usually start late May or late April or early May, and that does depend on the strength of the colonies and whether drones are on the wing or not, so I can get the queens mated. So when I get queen cells ready, doesn't matter what's natural or artificial, it's whatever's available. All I do from that one colony is make up 2 nukes, which we'll call B. Give them both 1 frame of sealed brood plus bees and 1 frame of food and a queen cell. So effectively what I've got are 2 frame nukes made out of that one colony. Now the key is that I've only taken 2 frames of brood and bees from it. That will recover quite quickly. Take too much more and it'll take a lot longer. Fill up the gaps with drawn comb, not foundation, unless that's all you've got. If you've got foundation, it'll slow you down considerably. So fill up the gaps with drawn comb. Then move that colony aside and replace it with the 2 nukes B. I favour bringing forward about a foot from where the previous entrance was and about a foot between the 2 boxes. So what happens is the bees fly out from A and they come back together with those that are already in the air to the normal entrance, can't find it, and they're shared out between both nukes. It's not quite as easy as that, but in the presentation on this, I'll explain what can go wrong and how I can put it right. Now you can repeat that through the season. It'll take that colony 2 to 3 weeks to recover, and then you can do the same again. So that's what you end up with, just a couple of frames. So really, there's only 2 frames been taken out of that colony. The food can come from others if you like. It really doesn't matter. So here it is in 2018. There's the parent colony, which has just been moved. It's got supers on, look. And where it has been moved from, there were 2 nukes put in the place on the previous stand, which on the left-hand side somewhere. And look, there are 7 nukes made up already, or 7 in the photograph. There may well be more than that. I don't really know. Now, those nukes, certainly the early ones, when they get moving, they pick up very quickly, and you've then got a couple of options. You can either put them into a full box, or you can split them again. And this is a tidy way of doing it. You bring two together, or fairly close together, put an empty box between them, which is a wooden box in between. Out of each one of the nukes, take one frame of brood, and if there is any food in there, take that and give it a queen cell. And then what you do is move the outside nukes away, so that the bees go straight into the middle one. That one then is almost a 5-comb nuke, almost straight away. So it's a simple way of increasing quickly. This is the 9th of July 2018. Here is the original colony. There's two of the early ones that have been put in full boxes already. And there are 8 nukes that have been made up from that colony by the 9th of July. So we've got a 10 out of 1 to start with. So at that demonstration, 2018, the parent colony produced a box of brood comb because on the 9th of July, or whenever the last photograph was, that was the second crop. The first crop was a brood chamber used as a super, brood chamber full of foundation. The bees had drawn it out, filled it up. So we got a box of brood comb, which of course is used on the nukes. It had produced 80 pounds of honey. I know we didn't measure it, but that was a guess from 2 or 3 of us. But it was certainly 80 pounds of honey anyway. And by the end of the year, there were 11 colonies strong enough to go into winter. Now, when I first gave wait, just a minute. I gave a sustainability talk down in Kent, and I put these few slides up. And at question time, a lady who happens to be a commercial beekeeper said, "Do you realise at my costs, what I sell them for, that's £2,300 to me." Now, if you think about it, folks, for perhaps a beekeeping association or a commercial beekeeper, what's involved in that? A few frames, some foundation. Let's say it costs you £300, just for argument's sake. You've got £2,000 free, and you haven't got £2,000 worth of work there. There could have been more. We did lose a few queens, so all we did was just united them up. Now, in those nukes, certainly the early ones, we had several queens mated in them, some of them 3 or 4. Now, beekeepers, ordinary beekeepers and beekeeping associations can do this. It really is simple, folks. And it's just one of those things that I don't know why it's not more widely used. I've got details on Dave Cushion's website. There's a PDF that you can download. BIBBA are, excuse me, BIBBA are looking at turning it into a little booklet. And on Cushion's website, there's also a page, increase methods for beekeeping associations. So if you are in a beekeeping association, have a look at that, and it'll give you some ideas how you can increase colonies, so you haven't got to go and buy them. And what I didn't say was, when I said that I'd heard that a lot of beekeeping associations couldn't provide enough colonies, I've come across 2 that buy 50 colonies for their beginners every year, and another one 35 colonies. And I know they're all headed by imported queens. With this method here, it's so simple for beekeeping associations to do it. So overwintering nukes then is a pretty good way of having queens early in the season. So you've got them for spring, either to sell as overwintered nukes, or perhaps make up for winter losses before they happen. If you're putting nukes into winter, they must be strong in bees. In effect, if you can see the brood and the comb in the area where the brood would normally be, even if there may not be any brood, if you can see it, they're not strong enough. You need to get some more bees in there somehow, or unite it to something else. They need to be strong in bees. If you do what we did with making 10 colonies from one, I can't remember that any of those needed any feeding, because one of the things you get when you produce queens is that you get brood breaks. And when you get a brood break, of course, there's no brood to feed, so the bees store more honey. They cost very, very little, and the build up from a strongish overwintered nuke is very, very quick in the spring. These are two that are going into winter. I put them side by side if I possibly can, because even into November you can lose queens. And if you do happen to lose a queen, then you just unite them up at that time of the year. Or certainly at a beekeeping association, somebody wants a queen, then take one out and just unite them up. So this has been so far about freebies and queens, but I think there are commercial opportunities here, perhaps a beekeeping association, so perhaps they can sell colonies to either their members, which I think will be a bit disappointing because it tends to suggest that they haven't taught them how to raise produce bees themselves, but certainly to beginners, or perhaps sell them on the open market. What about ordinary beekeepers? There are an awful lot of people coming into beekeeping at the moment that don't really want honey, not interested in honey. Well, produce a few nukes. And the good thing about that is if you recycle things, you're renewing your comb all the time. And of course, commercial beekeepers. And I think you could probably make the same, if not more, money out of producing bees and queens than honey. But folks, we can all contribute to improving our bees and reducing imports. Now, I'm nearly closed. In the new year, there will be follow-up webinars on lots of ideas that you can take on, and hopefully next spring we're going to start video tutorials which should help you as well. So please, 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 when the information comes out, don't just keep it yourself. Publicize it as widely as you can, your local beekeeping association, on social media. If you've got a tannoy and you like to ride around your local village on your bicycle, please do it. I don't care how you do it, but please publicize them. And get your beekeeping association, your local beekeeping association, your beekeepers involved. Don't just go away from here and think, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I'll do that. Try and get other people doing it as well, because if they do, it'll be an awful lot easier for you, because then you won't be fighting somebody else's undesirable drones mating with yours. Let's all be part of a revolution. Thank you very much for listening.
Yep. There we are. Thank you, Roger. Thank you very much. I've answered 11 questions, but there's still 22.
Is that all? Is that all?
Well, someone made a comment that they really like our double act. I think all it is that I just try to get all your errors and omissions corrected, aren't with these questions at the end, where you've got it all wrong during the presentation. Just
How do you know I got it wrong?
Hey, because I've heard it more than once, and you say them differently every time.
Oh, right.
The success rates always go up. Yeah. Anyway, you mentioned about publicity. Absolutely right. At the beginning, you mentioned NatBit, and we've got a Facebook page for that. So please show some interest. Have a look at the Facebook page, sign up, and that's some quite interesting stuff coming on it. Good question here, actually. Have you ever joined a sort of free living or feral colony with a fairly native colony or queen with your own and tried to play around with the native genetics at all?
I'm wondering what the questioner actually means. In general, if I get a free living colony, the queens are usually really good. Usually, they're always good tempered. As I've said on many occasions, I've removed several hundred from wild places. The only time I came across any that were bad tempered were a couple. Let's see, it would have been early last year now. About May last year, we took I think 3 or 4 colonies out of a barn, and I think two of those were quite spiky, and I believe they'd only just gone in there the previous year. But for some strange reason, I've never found them bad tempered. Never have. It might be that they lose morale having their home broken up, but you put them in a hive and they're usually pretty good. I've got a brilliant colony at the bottom of my garden now that I took out of a building last year, and I've actually raised queens from it twice. I know I don't normally do that, but they're so good that absolutely joy to handle. They really are.
Thank you. You've answered one question.
Actually, I'm not sure I have, because I wasn't quite sure why it was asked.
Yeah. I might. It's a good question, actually. I'll make a note of it, and we might get that one for the reconfigured for the panel. A few weeks ago, Peter Jenkins said he or his father chose not to cull aggressive bees because they might have other traits which are good for the gene pool as a whole. That's what the person says. That Peter said. Anyway.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
If a bad tempered colony's got a trait that nothing else has, I'd be happy to keep it. I'll tell you why. Because you can very often get through a generation of bad temper, and it's not always the case, but sometimes you can. And if you've got a really good colony, then yes, I would.
Okay.
What you've got to remember is that Griff Jenkins, Peter's father, he had fairly pure bees to start with. What a lot of the rest of us have got is very much a mishmash. So I think Griff might have had a better start than most of us.
Very popular question, this one. Is a better tempered hive more open to attraction from wasps and ended up producing less honey?
If you've got those really soft bees that you can handle without smoke, they, in my experience, are easily open to robbing. The sort of bees I'm talking about, if you smoke them reasonably well, smoke them correctly, they will stay docile. If you don't smoke them, they can start objecting. So when I say docile, I don't mean that you can open them without smoke. quite frankly, if you can open a colony without smoke, in general, they're not worth having. Oh, that's my experience. Because if they can't defend themselves, there's obviously a weakness there.
Um, this is a translation challenge from your West Sussex dialect. What do you mean by mollycoddling?
This one's come up before, isn't it? Several times. Right, if you've got to overfeed, so you feed. If you're feeding bees in general during the summer, you've got the wrong bees for your locality. If you've got to dope them up with all the various supplements and things that are being sold at the moment, then this is to keep them alive.
Yeah.
Then you're mollycoddling them. If you're insulating them, you're mollycoddling them. That's why I say it. Having said that, there are parts of the country where bees probably wouldn't survive naturally, and they probably need some sort of protection.
Yeah.
So I will qualify that. But yeah, mollycoddle. Yeah.
Now I've got some bees up on Saddleworth Moor, and then they're in a WBC. It's pretty bleak up there, and the wind is harsh. Okay, a couple of people asking the same question.
You're very quiet, Carl. Are you?
All right, sorry. You mentioned about keeping queen mating nukes away from production qualities for obvious reasons, and
Right.
it's not so obvious to some people. What are those obvious reasons?
Oh, right. Two things. If you've got several mating nukes, you could have queens either going out on orientation flights or coming back from, or going out or coming back from mating. Now, what a lot of people don't realise is that if you get, let's say, a batch of queens, 10 queens, just for argument's sake, and you put them all in 10 different nukes, usually it takes about 5 days for them to sexually mature before they go out. Now, if you have, let's say, a week's bad weather, and then all of a sudden the sun comes out, whoosh, pow, bang, they're all going out on the same day. So you've got all these virgin queens out there coming back. Now, there's a couple of things. If you're handling bees that are adjacent to them, you could be a marker that they don't recognize when they come back. So they could go in the wrong colony. The other thing is, if you look at a nuke when queens go out to mate, and you'll probably find that there are bees fanning at the entrance. Now, I'm assuming that's to help guide the virgin queens, or not virgin queens at that point, but the queens coming back. Now, when you handle a colony and you walk away from it, people don't realise what's still happening at the entrance. Sometimes you go back to a hive half an hour later and the bees are still fanning, because, of course, every time you open a hive, the bees at the entrance start fanning. Now, it could just be that a queen in a mating nuke, let's say 6 feet away, comes back, a big colony is fanning more, and she thinks, hang on, that's where I've got to go, and goes into slaughter. So they're the two main reasons. Now, it probably doesn't matter too much if you've got, let's say, 3, 4, 5 colonies, and you've got a nucleus that's or a colony with a queen that's about to get mated. It probably doesn't matter that much. Another thing to do is if you know you've got queens that are likely to go out mating, handle the other colonies probably before 10 o'clock in the morning and after 5 in the afternoon. I know that is way outside the normal areas that you're told, but I've spoken to people who've seen queens go out and come back, a lot earlier and a lot later than the books will tell you. So let's just make it easy for them. That's the reason. Yeah.
Okay. This is a reverse logic of what you've been talking about, but I've never really thought it through. If you have 10 colonies, 5 good and 5 poor, for example, and you don't do any culling or improvement, what do you end up with after a few years? Do you still have 5 good and 5 poor, or will some of the drones from the good improve the poor, or vice versa?
It depends why they're poor, really. If they're poor because they're not. Sorry, go to that again. Do you mean just to effectively abandon them? You know, it was
Well,
we got a hypothetical situation here, haven't we?
well, yeah, or a pretty good description of one of my apiaries. So you've got 5 poor and 5 good. But what if I don't bother culling the bad ones, or I don't bother propagating from the good
yeah.
ones?
If it's a case of not suiting the environment, I think the winter would take the bad ones out quite quickly. If not the first one, I think the second one would anyway. As far as temper is concerned, I think you'll end up with a little bit of a mishmash. When I'm splitting them up, I'm really getting rid of the poor ones because I don't really want their genes out into the environment. My guess is that if I've often thought about this, let's forget Varroa. If we just left our bees and put them on perhaps 3 brood chambers, 4 brood chambers, something like that, with no queen excluder, and walked away for 20 years, I think we'd have some very, very different bees than we got now. Certainly in the first year or two, a lot of them would get taken out. My guess is, from experience taking bees out of trees, that they would be good tempered. They would certainly be healthy because, in general, I see a lot less chalk brood and sac brood in free living colonies than I do managed colonies. And I think they'll be very, very different than the bees I see in managed colonies now.
Okay. Right. You talked about your 2-frame nuke and putting in some drawn brood frames if you've got them. Do you suggest people creating and keeping a stock of drawn brood frames?
Yeah, well, I do as a matter of course, and that is yet another talk. It's an incredibly valuable commodity. Drawn comb is incredibly valuable, and the reason is that I find that if you put foundation in a brood chamber, if you haven't got any nectar coming in, the bees just don't build wax. So of course they climb all over it, and when nectar does come in, they can produce a wax, and they build all over the place. And that, I think, is one of the reasons that a lot of beekeepers have got poor combs. Now, if you got them built out above a queen excluder, you can then either use them with fooding, doesn't matter. You could use them for winter feeding as the ordinary beekeeper, or you can extract them and then use them in place of foundation. If you put them in a colony, a queen should lay it up within a couple of 3 days. With foundation, that won't happen. Now, I don't like splitting up colonies. I know some people do with foundation. If you've got a nectar flow on, you're usually okay because the bees can draw it out straight away. But if there's no nectar coming in, the bees won't draw the foundation, so the queen then stays to one side.
Yeah, fair enough.
I have actually seen emergency cells the other side too.
Okay. So
Quite rarely, but I've seen it, I don't know, probably a handful of times.
Yeah.
Where people split brood up.
Okay. There's there's lots here. Yeah. Where do you get your queen cells where do they come from? You say put a queen cell in. Where are they all coming from? Do you buy them?
Oh, well, yeah, no, I explained that you tend to get natural queen cells. Of course, during the summer, it's most likely to be swarm cells. If you can't get swarm cells, then just take a queen away from a colony and leave it about 8 days, and then just take the best emergency cells. That's a good way of doing it. If you've got more colonies, you can raise artificial queen cells, or I think there's an opportunity for beekeeping associations to start producing queen cells for members. It gives you a lot more teaching, and it helps beekeepers, especially beginners, perhaps increase. So to get from the 1 colony to 2, they might not have the confidence to produce their own queens. Whereas if you show them how to do it at the teaching apiary, they can then a week or 2 later make up a nuke, and then perhaps take a queen cell home for it.
And if you're putting a queen cell in, what's your preferred way of putting a queen cell into a nuke?
You need to put a queen cell into the brood area. Sadly, I've seen people put them in where the food is. The bees don't keep them warm enough there. Needs to be in either where the brood area, where there's brood, or if there is no brood in the colony, where the bees have left for a space for the queen to lay. If you've got a gap or a hole, that's probably as good as any. If not, just take your thumb, push it into the comb, and then pull it down a bit, and it creates a nice little area. Push right back to the midrib, creates a nice little area that you can put the queen cell into. But of course, before you do that, you need to make sure that the colony has been queenless, certainly a couple of 3 hours. Otherwise the bees would probably tear it down.
Have you any suggestions, apart from moving house, for beekeepers who live near a beekeeper who imports queens every year to rear nukes and sell?
Next question, please.
Yes, it's a really tough one.
Well, no, yeah, whatever you do, if you go and have a word with somebody, they're going to say, well, you're trying to put me out of business. The ideal thing would be to produce bees and queens themselves. It's easy enough. It really is. And it's cheaper. You're probably selling a better product.
Yep.
Yeah, it is an issue throughout the country, and I think if we're not careful, we'll get in a position of blaming people, which I think on my first webinar I tried to avoid.
Okay, now we spent a little time answering questions. There's actually 10 more questions to answer than when we started answering them. So for every one you answer, there's 2 or 3 coming at us. Okay, so if you don't mind, everybody, thank you very much. I'm going to have to carry some of these across to the panel discussion next week, which Roger and Peter Jenkins will be there. Plus, we'll have a science point of view and an MBD point of view.
Norman Carrick.
Yeah.
We're hoping to get Joe Widdicombe too, and Grace.
Okay. Yep. And some of these questions that people are asking, really, really good questions. Roger's touched on a few things in the webinar tonight that is actually covered in detail in previous webinars. They're available to view on the BIBBA website. They're free to view for BIBBA members and non-BIBBA members. So have a little rake through, you can see that. Thank you very much to everybody tonight. Record attendance for the most popular event so far. So good on you, Roger. And I hope to see you all next week. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Good night, everybody.
Cheers.
Good night, Carl.
Yeah.